Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you're tuning in from. My name is Erica Austin, and I am joined today by Jean Donaldson, who is the author of Mine, the second edition. Jean, I'm so happy to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing
Thank
this
you very
morning?
much for inviting me.
So excited to be talking about this book with you today. For people who are tuning in, we want to know where you're tuning in from, and we want to know, have you read the book? Have you ordered the book? Have you read the first version and you can't wait to get your hands on the second version, the second updated edition? We're going to tell you what the differences are and some of the things that are different in the new edition and how that all came about. But please go ahead and leave us a comment. Let us know where you are tuning in from. If you have ordered the book, you probably have not yet had time to leave a review because it only just came out. We only just got the books in stock and started giving them out, sending them out to people. But when you do read the book, it means a lot if you would leave a review for the book and tell people what you thought of it. So once you read the book or after this discussion, let us know what you think of this book. We want to hear all about it. So like I said, leave a comment. And if you have a question for Jean, throughout this conversation, we really want to know your thoughts. This is supposed to be a dialogue. This is an interactive conversation. So if you have questions about resource guarding or about the new book, that's what we want to hear. We've got some people tuning in. Yes, I have the first edition and have used it. Fabulous information. I totally agree. Rachel says, hello from Vancouver. Have read the first edition. Looking forward to hearing what's new and what has changed in the second edition. Yes, and we've got people joining in from the UK, from Wyoming. Haven't ordered the book yet, but excited, enjoying the first edit. Natasha, the first edition. Natasha actually has been one of our most active members in our virtual book club. And Jean, you don't know this yet, but for our virtual book club, we are going to be reading this book, this edition of Mine for book club for the month of April. So that'll be at the end of the month. Watch our social media if you want to learn more information about that. But this is going to be such a great conversation to have. Look, we've got a question already. We'll just start with that. So our question from Pokey Snout is, are some breeds more prone to resource guarding than others?
This is not based on research. So this is very much just an opinion based on experience. And I would say yes. You see it a lot in herding dogs. So dogs who are very about their stuff, your border collies and Aussies, cattle dogs, Malinois, those guys can be really very about their stuff. Interestingly, in field line sporting dogs, you sometimes see it, and you see it a lot in Asian breeds and Spitz breeds. But that's not to say that you're never going to see it in other breeds. So it can crop up in pretty much anybody.
Something that I like about this book is the case studies at the end. And you talk about a whole bunch of different breeds that are kind of a wide range. And you also talk about different ages that this can pop up and when it's more likely to. But just because it pops up most of the time in a certain breed or a certain age doesn't mean that that's always the rule, right?
It's not prognostically significant, the breed that it pops up in, and it's not prognostically significant either the age that it pops up in. Sometimes people think, well, it pops up in puppies. So in some of the precocious breeds, Chows and Shibas, Basenjis, Jack Russell Terriers, those guys where it pops up really early, sometimes people think, oh my God, this is a demon dog because puppies shouldn't be doing this. It should have the usual onset at social maturity. And that's not true. It doesn't mean that it's worse, and it doesn't mean that it's harder to solve. In fact, in my experience with puppies, it's a little bit easier. They're safer. They learn quickly. And so I generally am not at all alarmed when I see it in puppies.
There's also a section in the book where you talk about prevention for resource guarding. And so there's some really good information there as well. Angie says, I see it a lot in Cocker Spaniels in the UK.
Yes. Yeah.
Someone who has adopted a border collie, a herding breed, and was given this dog he was 1.5 years old. He'd already had 4 homes. And the people who we rescued him from, a really wonderful rescue in Maryland, said, he's got resource guarding. And I was like, it's okay. I'm a professional trainer. I can totally handle this. Let me really quick see what there is to see about that. So yeah, seeing it in specific breeds, but also, being able to have the tools that you need to address it no matter what breed of dog that you're working with can be really important. So I'm really grateful for this book and this resource. I want to share, we shared some quotes on our social media on Facebook and Instagram. We even shared some things on TikTok. And I would love to know if you want to leave us a comment. How did you hear about this live interview? Because we're always trying to improve getting the word out to more people. It's such an amazing opportunity to be able to talk to authors and give you all access to the authors to ask these questions yourselves. So let us know where you found out about this. I was just telling Jean that I actually posted something last night on Instagram. She said, "Oh, I haven't even seen it yet." So we're going to come back to this slide a little bit later and talk about it. But let us know if you have seen some of the posts that we've been making lately and how you're hearing about these events, because we really want to spread the word to more people. So Jean, I want to ask you, how did the second edition come about? The first edition has been a bestseller for years. It's a resource that I've used and recommended for a really long time. How did you decide, okay, it's time for a second edition?
It's primarily because with another almost 25 cases that I've done or coached Academy graduates on under my belt, there's been a refinement in the training plans. So in the actual plans proper, the step-by-step how-to stuff, it's now down to more of a science rather than, well, let's just put in all conceivable steps to make sure that somebody doing a DIY without trainer supervision is probably not going to get themselves into hot water. With the new edition, what I've got is, okay, so most cases are probably going to be able to be done with these steps. And then at the end of each sort of plan proper are, okay, so if you get into trouble at step X, Y, or Z, here are the usual ways that we can fix that. So there's more of a formula involved, and sort of less art and more kind of science in terms of, okay, probably this is how it's going to go. And the other thing, I fixed the writing a little bit that I was less than happy about. And then added, like you said, added some case studies at the end, some of the really kind of interesting ones that had interesting wrinkles in them. Because sometimes people think, well, if it's this or this particular kind of resource, or the dog presents like this, it's a whole new ballgame. And in fact, it's not. The principles are the same, but sometimes you just need to add in a few more steps.
I really love the troubleshooting that you put in, that you added into the book. And I'm actually looking to see, I know that there was a page in the book. Oh, actually, I know that I bookmarked it. I went through and put a whole bunch of bookmarks into my book and was making notes for things I wanted to ask you about. But there's an entire section where you talk about training plateaus. And training plateaus, I feel like that just, I'm like, oh yes, tell me more. And it's like a little paragraph in there. And I was like, no, I need to hear everything you have to say about training plateaus, because how often does that happen where, you're on a roll and you're going and then you're like, I see it a lot in my shaping plans where I'm doing specifically a task, or I'm trying to train something really specific. And I'm like, okay, I clicked one too many times for that. And now we're stuck and we have to get past that. So I'm so glad that you talked about that in the book and you addressed that for us, because the troubleshooting and, like you said, the case studies that have those interesting wrinkles are the ones that really are where you learn, right? The easy ones that follow the recipe, it's like, oh, well, sure, just follow step 1 through 45 or whatever it is, and you'll get there in this linear fashion. And that's not really how dog training goes.
No, and not just sort of fixing resource guarding, but generally training in general. I mean, if you look at an animal learning textbook, you'll see sort of like, an operant curve, and it'll be this beautiful sort of, smooth thing. In actual fact, as we know, once we're sort of on the ground working with real dogs and generally with real people, none of us are perfect. There's going to be an awful lot of sort of jagged edges where you go backwards, oops, this didn't go well. And then, as you say, training plateaus, it needs to be normalized. It's really normal that sometimes it seems like you're motoring along, and then at a certain step for any given dog, that's particularly tricky for them. It doesn't mean that they flunk and you have to go backwards, but they need a little more in terms of repetition on that step before you go forward. Or sometimes, like you say, occasionally it's technical where, if you're shaping and you dig yourself into a hole, you're stuck there. But often it's the dog.
Yeah. And I think that thinking about shaping plans, thinking about resource guarding, and like you said, like normalize it. Like, of course you're going to get stuck in your training plan. Of course it's not going to go perfectly. That's just a part of the experience. That's just a part of learning on both ends of the leash, right?
Yeah, and one of the things when we emphasize sort of with academy students is, especially in this day and age, in the 21st century, we have a lot of things where it sort of our patience and our ability to tolerate sort of pace has been very much eroded. It used to be when I was a kid, if you wanted to know something, if you didn't have encyclopedias in your house, you'd go to a library or wait and ask a teacher, and maybe you'd get an answer. Now, if you want to know who won the baseball game last night, if you want to know what's going on with the James Webb Telescope, you want to know anything, you've got it at your fingertips. You've got these little computers in your hands. If you want to watch a given movie, you can stream it immediately. We were used to things happening really, really quickly, microwave ovens, all of it. And then we collide with dogs, and dogs are at what we call bio speed. They have not participated at all in the technological revolution. Their brains are basic mammalian brains, as they were millions of years ago. And so in a way, it's kind of good for us, the way kind of cruciferous vegetables are good for us, to have to slow down and do something at biological speed. We all sort of spend time thinking, oh, how do I get in sort of a meditative state? And how can I slow down? And one of the ways to do that is to do an activity where you're participating with a living being and you're forced to kind of slow down. And so sometimes people get impatient, but my hope is that when people really get into it, they get the added fringe benefit of kind of going along at the pace of a normal animal.
I really like that. I recently stumbled across an Instagram account where it's someone who's reading while she's painting these like very like meditative lines. And she basically was saying like, not just like stop the scroll, but just take 2 minutes with me and like you said, like behave biologically, participate with another biological being. And what an amazing opportunity to do that with our dogs. I've never thought about it like that they haven't participated in the technological revolution. And how frustrated do we get when we go on a walk and they want to stop and sniff something? We're like, no, we've got a plan. We've got an agenda. Let's go. But like, take a minute and just take a deep breath with your dog. What a wonderful invitation.
It is. It's a gift rather than, or as they say, it's a feature rather than a bug.
I like that. In the software, you mean?
Yeah. It's sort of that dogs go at that speed,
Yeah. Yeah. I think hearing you say that reminds me, there's a part on page 9 where you think about resource guarding as like an old buggy software that some dogs still have. So thinking about it that way, Andy said, what a great point regarding patience. I think it's so common in our modern environment, especially on social media. I see this all the time as someone who does social media for a living, that like trying to grab people's attention and then hold it for more than 3 to 5 seconds is becoming this really uphill battle. And having like, I tell people all the time, like my job is so hard because I want to get your attention really fast and then make you sit down and read something that's going to take way longer than 3 seconds to get it and then digest it and then apply it. It feels like a battle to try and get that. So I'm so happy to see everyone here leaving comments and joining us for this deeper conversation than just a quick.
And I know, I feel it too. I'm completely guilty. If I'm scrolling Instagram and somebody doesn't grab me, I think you said 3 to 5 seconds. If somebody doesn't grab me quickly, next, and I see myself doing that, On the other hand, I also feel like, okay, like books, and I'm like a paper book aficionado. And like, I know it sort of as, Kindle and all that kind of stuff sort of takes off in electronic versions. I sort of think, oh my God, are they going to eventually phase out books, And I think that's one of the things that's going to make me want to, storm the barricades, is if they ever sort of threaten to do that.
Absolutely. We did actually have a question on social media a couple of days ago if this was going to be available as an ebook. It is, and that is definitely a way for people internationally to get the book, not just faster, but easier with shipping. And we are going to look to make this one of our audio books as well. So that will be a project down the road. We want to be able to reach people in multiple formats, but I'm the same way as you. Like I've got bookmarks. I've like, oh, this part's interesting. And I'm definitely someone who's dog-earing and writing in the book and highlighting. And I love being able to go to my bookshelf and pull something down and be like, I just very much, right? And like, oh, I have my reference book. I know exactly where I wrote down, whatever it is. And being able to pull it off the bookshelf just feels different than like scrolling.
Oh, yeah. There's something, the physicality of books.
Yes, it's important. I'm going to share a passage from the book with everybody. Speaking of expectations for ourselves and speaking of thinking about patience and trying to slow down and working with another species, this quote from the book, we shared it on our social media in the last couple of days, thinking about the expectations of our dogs, that we've set these really high standards that we would consider absurd for any other species of animal, including us. We want no conflict resolution behavior directed at humans of even the most ritualized sort at any time over the course of the dog's entire life. And that would be like a human going a lifetime without ever arguing with a family member or using frosty language, you say, on social media, which is something that I think, you know, we've all seen that social media frosty language, right? And all of this, you say, is species normal conflict, forbidding it from our dogs. It's just so unreasonable to expect that from our dogs. So can you talk a little bit about like what you were thinking when you were writing this passage, or thinking about how dogs are at play in our society and kind of what's going on for them and the expectations we have for them?
Yes, dogs are held to a standard that no other species, including our other animals. So people are routinely bitten by and thrown off horses. There's numerous sort of hilarious sort of, posts on Instagram of cats landing on their owners in the middle of the night and scratching up their faces. Birds biting people, all manner of that. If you watch Animal Planet for 10 minutes, what you're going to see is animals fighting over food and females, and monopolizing territory so they can monopolize the food and females in that territory. Animals defending themselves from perceived reasons. We pay money to watch this stuff. We ourselves, I don't know anybody who's never done sort of a normal human conflict, ritualized aggressive behavior. And most of us don't escalate to, assault or murder. We engage in sort of, species normal conflict resolution. For some reason, dogs are exempt from this. We want dogs to never, ever do this. And when dogs do it, it gets bucketed in one thing, which we call aggression. It really is exactly the same as me saying, well, Erica, later on, if you, argue with a friend or put a slightly tart comment at the bottom of a video on YouTube, then that's exactly the same as aggravated assault. It's all the same. It's all aggression. And it's absurd. It really is absurd. And yet the strange thing is that dogs are the one species that are not allowed. Sometimes I think it's to do with the fact that we have, as humans, we have dedicated software, anti-predator software from way, way, way back. It's sort of why we, this ancient software, that's why we crave sweets. It's why we fear spiders and snakes more than we fear printers. It's how we've been sort of, how we evolved. And we also don't fear motor vehicle accidents. More people fear spiders than motor vehicle accidents in spite of the actual risk. And so we are sort of slaves to our evolutionary heritage. And part of that was being preyed upon at some point by animals with pointy teeth. And dogs are relatively large animals with pointy teeth. And so they press those buttons in us. But hopefully we can override that with our modern, intellect and say, you know what, it is kind of crazy to hold dogs up to that standard. And dogs who do sort of ritualize, they growl and they snap and they snarl, they bite and they don't leave. That those dogs are not at risk to later on kill us. And if we can just get that on board, it would be enormously helpful.
Yeah, I'm really glad in the book you have a wonderful glossary of terms at the very beginning of the book, of the second edition. And one of the things that you talk about pretty early on is inhibited bites and the idea of a soft or good mouth. I recently had a friend who was adopting a dog and they were like, what does it mean he has a soft mouth? What is that? What is that, a made up term? And I'm like, oh no, it's a real thing. Let me tell you what it means. And it was a golden retriever, I think. So we talked about, how they're bred for more of a soft mouth, but looking at kind of the different warning signs and threat signals that the dogs are giving us. And if we can respect those and know how to read those signs and why they're relevant, that can be really important. And like you said, like, we've got supposedly this high functioning brain that should be able to override a little bit of that evolutionary impulse to say, oh my gosh, pointy teeth must be a threat to my life, as opposed to saying this is a normal part of a dog's behavior.
That's right. Behavior. And most dogs don't go on to do significant injury. All of us, on probably a monthly basis, we hurt ourselves in the kitchen. I don't know if you've ever zested yourself with a citrus zester, but holy crap.
Yeah.
It's bad, and nobody would think of sort of, going to the emergency room and reporting the citrus zester and freaking out. And then, we should ban citrus zesters, or, throwing away the one we have. Minor kitchen level injuries, happen. Very different from dogs who do bite hard. I mean, they are out there. And there is sort of, if we want to get into the weeds about sort of soft mouth, sort of originally when, Michael Fox and Ian Dunbar were talking about sort of acquired bite inhibition, how puppies learn to inhibit the force of their bites. And, canines sort of do this because they're very sort of conflict prone and they're very social. And so they need a way to do that without injuring each other. And so that's developed in puppies and all the stuff that they've talked about. More recently, in the last 10 years, people like Ilana Reisner, who's a veterinary behaviorist, have talked about, well, it doesn't seem as though it's always static, that a dog's given mouth, how hard they bite when they bite is going to always be the same, that it's always predictable. I mean, she talks about sort of like, dogs when they're actually in panic mode. So, the classic example of the tail in the car door, or a dog was really fearing for their lives, that bite can sometimes be worse. And so, I want to take what she says seriously, that we want to be really mindful to make sure that, a dog is in a resource guarding context, that's what they're going to do, but doesn't necessarily mean that that's what they're going to do if they actually panic. And the other thing that's needed is, it would be good to have some research in this regard, because there is sort of diverse opinion about how stable bite inhibition is. It would be good if this could be looked into sort of in a longitudinal way, so we could start to really get to the bottom of, okay, is a given dog, is that going to be their mouth? And if so, under what circumstances, and how predictable is it? How much can we bank on it? Certainly in my experience, what you see is what you get. So if the dog is bitten a few times and it's within a certain range, if he does it in future, that is what you're going to continue to get. And it is prognostically significant that dogs that inflict lower levels of injury are prognostically more favorable than dogs who inflict severe injury.
And that's important to know, especially for those of us who work with severe aggression cases or dogs with a bite history. And, there's so many factors to consider. And you talk about that in the book, if there's children in the home or other elements as well. We have a couple of questions, but relevant to what we're talking about right now. On page 8, I love this so much. A snap is an air bite. The dog deliberately misses. People frequently report that a dog tried to bite them but missed, or else they were able to move away quickly enough. But this is unlikely, as a geriatric couch potato dog has a reaction time better than an Olympic athlete. When dogs intend to bite, they bite. When they intend to snap, they snap. I really like this passage. It's something that I think is, a common misconception, is this idea of, well, he almost bit me, but he didn't, so he missed, but he meant to. And I really like what you say at the end. When they intend to bite, they do. When they intend to miss, they do.
Yeah, I am very much of the opinion that is what you get. I think there are people out there who would differ, and they say, well, occasionally, they wanted to bite you, but I got out of the way. I'm not of that mind.
Yeah, I think that is, we've got a comment from Ben saying, I've been bit twice. There's no missed bites. Dogs are super fast.
Dogs are super fast.
They're super fast. We have a couple of questions. Pokey Snout wants to know, do you address dog resource guarding in the new edition of Mine?
Pokey Snout, not very directly. In other words, not with a bunch of plans. Dog resource guarding tends to be in that category of things that we use a normalizing strategy, meaning, and we call it the Animal Planet option, which is, I know that humans take it very seriously and we freak out when dogs aggress at us. Other dogs tend not to. They don't care. So if the dogs are not injuring each other, so if they're arguing about sleeping locations, so they're growling each other off food or toys or bones, and nobody's getting hurt, my strong advice is to just watch and do nothing. Monitor it, make sure it's not getting worse and nobody's putting holes into each other. But if they're not hurting each other, to just let them do it. I don't want to go so far as to say, well, it's enrichment, but it is sort of dogs getting to exercise species normal behavior. It is very much like, me saying, well, I argued with my husband, 4 times in the last year. we should go to a counselor to see if we can not argue anymore. It's just not normal, and it's not a worthy goal to try and reduce or get rid of regular conflict resolution behavior amid canines. They cope with it really, really well. So the exceptions would be if one of the dogs is injuring one of the other dogs, or if one of the dogs is afraid. And that would go for any dog interaction, by the way, that if one dog is afraid of the other dog, that's a different story. We want to do something. But if they're just doing routine object guarding or food or location guarding towards each other, honestly, don't do anything. Just watch. It's Animal Planet for free. The other thing is trying to work on it. So if you did try to do it, so let's say, well, let's adapt the plans and try to get dogs to do it. It's ferociously difficult to try to get a dog to participate in the training the way that we could. So if I say, well, we're going to approach within X amount of time and then stop and then withdraw, to try and get the other dog to do that, it's almost prohibitively clunky to try and do it. Now, luckily, we don't have to. So that, that's the answer.
I like it as Animal Planet for free, just kind of, and I also like that you said, it is a species typical behavior. Wouldn't maybe go so far as calling it enrichment, but allowing these dogs and observing these dogs communicating with each other. You don't want to cut off all of the communication. I do know there was something I remember I was flipping through the book last night, and you do address, so to answer the question directly, you do address it in the book, but I think that, obviously you wrote the book, you know what's in here better than I do, but addressing it and saying like, here is, the thoughts about that. And you even talk about like, it's difficult to do. It's difficult to set up those kind of situations, and being able to kind of work with a dog in that controlled of an environment to replicate it, to be able to like train out of it. But I think one thing that you do talk about in the book also is management. And you talk also about muzzle training, tethers, tools like that. So when we're thinking about, like you said, if the dogs are putting holes in each other, and it's time to intervene. So being able to have a tool available for that as you're working on whatever ultimate solution you're going to get to. But I'm glad that you brought that up, that, resource guarding with another dog is a tricky.
Our tolerance for dogs just behaving normally is really not where it ought to be. This attempt that, oh my God, what if it's slightly stressful? It's slightly stressful for a dog to have another dog approach him when he's got a bone and the other dog gets growled off. Isn't that stress? Technically, yes, but play is stressful. Going to the gym raises my cortisol. Getting up in the morning raises my cortisol. It's stressful to watch, a suspenseful movie. There's all kinds of stuff which is really, it doesn't rise to the level of needing intervention. And I worry about sort of attempts to, like, the dog must never for even like a brief moment sort of have anything other than sort of a Zen level of calm. I think it's first of all, it's not achievable. And second of all, I think in terms of animal welfare, we've got much bigger fish to fry.
I agree with you. I will say we, Dogwise published a book several years ago called The Stress Factor in Dogs. The subtitle is Unlocking Resiliency and Enhancing Well-Being, not get rid of the stress. And Christina Spalding does an excellent job explaining the difference between distress and eustress. Eustress being something that is a stress that feels good. I felt stressed when we logged on and we were about to go live, and are the cameras working? Is there any glitches? But it was a good stress to have the opportunity to talk to you and to all the people who are following. So like you said, eliminating stress from our dogs' lives, and like you said, having them be Zen all the time should not be the goal.
Right.
So
it's fallen out of favor, but 5 or 10 years ago, there was sort of this effort made to say, we shouldn't let dogs get zoomies, or we shouldn't let dogs fetch, or we shouldn't let dogs get excited, and sort of this attempt, and it was all sort of arousal or over arousal, and this sort of attempt to put all into the same bucket. Everything from a dog being happily excited to a dog being actually afraid or anxious. And this is, I thought it was just, luckily it's out of favor now, but for a while there, I don't know if it was just clickbait or whether people were actually believing this stuff, that somehow you're going to, give the dog a compulsive disorder by playing fetch. Hang on a second. These dogs were bred to want to compulsively, play fetch. You don't, by giving them the outlet, that doesn't produce the problem. It's sort of the exact opposite of what, Conrad Lorenz used to talk about, so the hydraulicness of certain kinds of behavior, that you've got to give animals an outlet for these things. You can't just cork the volcano and think that that's, the solution. So now it might eventually, the way that fashions happen in dog training, it might bubble up again. For the moment, luckily, it's not a thing.
It's something, the fetch debate on social media, it pops up on my feed every once in a while. And I think it's such a much more nuanced conversation than you can have on social media, right? Like you said, is it clickbait? When you said take away the zoomies, I was like, no, don't take away the zoomies. Don't those make everybody happy? But I think that's the thing. It's not a switch. You can just turn it off and say, okay, well, I don't like that, or I don't think it's healthy. So I'm going to say it's bad for every dog ever in every circumstance.
Yeah.
So, more nuanced conversations about that are important.
Yeah.
And like you said, meeting those species' typical needs are also.
Yeah. If you're gonna breed dogs to, want activity X, and then say you don't like it, then that's a pretty dirty trick.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. We've got a couple questions I want to put up for you and ask for you. Dawn is asking, is the plan for resource guarding people in the household different from resource guarding bowls, toys, the sofa, etc.? So
that's a great question.
Versus object guarding.
Yeah, so guarding people, sort of like, so you want to sort of think, the person is, and we call it lap guarding, or, guarding the human, or the human adding value to the sofa, or whatever sort of the scenario is. You want to think, okay, so is the human an object, or is the human food, or how, which type of plan works better? Because the food guarding plan tends to be one where you're not going away and doing exchanges so much as you're doing approaches and adding bonuses. And if you think about people, it's difficult to sort of go, take the person away and then put the person back. So what we tend to do is sort of surf the food guarding style of plan, and do approaches and additions. Okay. So that's the sort of the short answer there. So is it different? Yeah, of course it's a different thing. I mean, technically humans are not food, but as it turns out, the food guarding style of plan is the one that tends to work pretty well when dogs are guarding people. You can also do really super duper simple solutions. Like if you've got like a small dog who's a lap guarder, you can definitely, desensitize them to that. But you can also do things like when somebody comes up, you put them off, take them off the lap, and then poof, it disappears. So a management solution is perfectly fine there.
You even talk in the book about the difference between a dog that might guard one person or not, or kind of the differences in a household member. And I really liked that, reading about that, because I've certainly run into that situation, especially with clients, where they're like, well, the dog's protecting me from,
people can get very, very personal. Like the dog is guarding me from you, therefore the dog likes me better.
It's so interesting what we think dogs think.
Yeah.
Ben would like to know if you could address the differences, if any, between what some folks call jealousy versus guarding. Are they different or not? So speaking of those labels that we put on our dogs who do resource guarding or people guarding.
So resource guarding is a thing that kind of the animal is doing. Okay. So it's, in concrete terms, the dog is guarding a resource. Jealousy is sounds like it's an underlying motivation that might drive behavior in me, you, or a dog. It's hard to know whether dogs experience jealousy in the way that we do. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. There's certainly plenty of things that I think where people tend to ascribe jealousy to it. So I would say, yeah, they are different insofar as guarding is something where we're getting down to kind of, okay, we can operationalize that. This is what he's doing, and here's what we can do to fix it. Jealousy is sort of a layer down where we're sort of presuming underlying motivation. So that's a good question. I would say they are a little different.
It's a really good distinction. This most recent question from Mallory, I've heard from a trainer that smaller dogs tend to choose one person and won't be friendly with other people in the home. Do you agree with this, or can I tell my partner we can adopt a Yorkie?
Get your Yorkie. That's a good. I'm trying to think. Is there sort of a greater prevalence of spouse guarding, or guarding one spouse against the other? Is it more prevalent in small dogs? Certainly, it's not something I've noticed. It's possible. I don't think so. There's plenty of big dogs that do it. So if it is a thing, and maybe some of the trainers can chime in whether they've seen it more often in small dogs. Because small dogs are on laps, and so in a big dog, yeah, that's a good question. So I'm not willing to sort of put a bet here, but I would say absolutely get a Yorkie. And plus, if he's doing it, just manage it or train it out.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too, and also every animal is an individual, right? We know there's some breed specific, right, but also you might get, when we adopted our border collie, the rescue said, "Is this your first border collie?" And I said, "Yes." And they said they don't snuggle. They want to be at the foot of the bed. They want to be near you, but they don't snuggle. And I all the time was like, "Our dog's broken." Like,
that's something. Yeah. I used
snuggling.
to be in border collies too, and that was not my experience. I had one that was relatively sort of, matter of fact and not fantastically snuggly, but another one was very snuggly. So,
Yeah, I think to Mallory, to your point, we have, as trainers and people who work, canine professionals, we have anecdotal evidence, right? I, work with this breed on this thing more often than that, but is it correlation or causation? We don't have the research. There are some research studies where, there are organizations that are sending out surveys to owners or to trainers to say, what's your experience in this case or this case? But we don't have the research to prove it. We can tell you what our experience is, but your best bet would definitely be to get that Yorkie. And then if you have problems, you let us know.
Absolutely. Get what your heart wants, unless it's like completely outlandish, ridiculous, kind of dog for your situation. I'm as breedist as anybody. A really good book, by the way, if you want it, people who want to get sort of like, okay, so, am I prone to biases? And there's this book by Daniel Kahneman called Thinking Fast and Slow. And it's based on his longer research in behavioral economics, but it's super duper interesting because it talks about how our brains work and how we're prone to falling into certain kinds of traps. It's really, really super duper helpful to get your head around why, I'm having a breed bias, or I think this about dogs. Is it true?
I always love a good book recommendation, so we'll have to check that one out. Angie says, great analogies. Is it true that you cannot teach an adult dog bite inhibition?
That's a great question. My best answer, sort of sitting here in 2026, my best answer is no, you can't. I have not been able to do it. I don't know anybody that's been able to do it. So when we talk about bite inhibition, we're not talking about the mouth taking treats. That you can definitely modify. You can teach the dog, if he's a bit sharky when you give him treats, you can teach him to not do that. And you can also teach him to do it to the point where he's doing it even when it's a quote unquote cold trial where he's not warmed up. That you can do. But when the dog's biting under duress, okay, so he's afraid, he's anxious, he doesn't like people, he doesn't like body handling, he's a resource guard, etc. The mouth is what you kind of get within that certain range. So to my knowledge, we don't yet have technology to fix that.
Great question. We had some comments earlier when we were talking about stress. Jess says, overcoming stress builds confidence for most mammals. And Natasha said, I absolutely think we should be teaching our dogs how to handle stress versus keeping them from it. That only.
Yeah, I love the current trend sort of towards, building resilience rather than trying to avoid all stress. And that's a great trend.
Pokey Snout said that they saw that you shouldn't let dogs tug, probably in that same fetch capacity, which is, like you said, seeing the current trend and this conversation. We think about the conversation that's happening on social media and where people are getting their information from. The beginning of this talk, when you said, you used to have to wait for the information, ask a teacher or a librarian if you didn't have an encyclopedia. Now it's just right at your fingertips.
It is at your fingertips. Mind you, it's right at your fingertips, and some of it is absolute dead wrong junk. So you got to be careful.
Exactly. Those sources are not necessarily tested. Anyone can say anything on the internet. So and to the point earlier that we were talking about anecdotal evidence of, you may have one trainer saying tug is bad, fetch is bad because I saw this in this dog I was working with. And you may have another animal pro who's saying, actually, this is species typical behavior and can be counted as enrichment. So there's such a wide range.
Yeah.
I was very recently at Clicker Expo, and Susan Friedman said, never give anyone else the authority, put someone else in a position of authority that you can't trust your own critical thinking skills. And I was like, I'm going to write that down and put it on my wall, because that's something to think about as well, is like, you can trust yourself and you can make these decisions based on the relationship that you have with your dog. Read the resources that are available, do some research, but just having someone on the internet say, don't play tug or fetch with your dog.
Yeah.
Jess said, I see jealousy in quotes. We talked about that being an emotion or maybe an underlying motivation in a multi-pack household if they all want attention or all want the same engagement. So is that maybe, Jess, you said you see jealousy, but I would challenge you to say that you're not seeing an underlying emotion. You're probably seeing a behavior.
You're seeing dogs competing, or, a dog seems to have his nose out of joint, So my husband's got a German Shepherd, and we're all watching TV, and Brian's on the ottoman. This is Brian, the little guy back there. And if I'm patting Max, Brian's nose will get out of joint. So, boy, is it ever tempting to call that jealousy. So yeah, I totally see what you're saying.
Yeah. And again, thinking about those labels that we put on and how those serve us or not as we're asking these questions. Great feedback, Jess. Thank you for that. We've got a viewer who says, so grateful for both of your work and insight. I have a working line German Shepherd dog who resource guards a few times. We've worked hard. Is resource guarding ever considered cured?
That's a great question. I would probably, try in terms of sort of medical analogies, rather than calling it cured, I would certainly say you can get it into remission. So you can get it to the point where you're not seeing it anymore. Does it mean that sort of, the program isn't sort of still in there, but it's just been overwritten, with other software that you've installed? Yeah, I would say, certainly, I used to track cases, and I was like an inveterate data junkie and did follow up on cases, and plenty of them, it never came back. Occasionally it does, but then there's plenty of dogs where they never resource guarded, and then it popped up at age 5 or 3 or whatever it was. So it's hard to know, what, in other words, what's your threshold for cure? What percentage of dogs where it doesn't reappear would you say, yeah, it can be cured? But I would say, yeah, for sure. My previous dog to Brian was Buffy. She's the one that's actually on the cover. Lily Chin did a great sort of mock-up of that. It was my Chow Chow. And she was like just like the demon from hell, in terms of, guarding everything. And she had it as a puppy. And, just did all standard procedures, and it was gone. And we tried when she was sort of an older adult, just for the purposes, because it'd be useful because it's a handy dog to have around to sort of shoot a video. So let's get it back. So we tried to nurse it back in her. We tried to get her to guard stuff. We couldn't get her to do it.
That's amazing.
So that's pretty, So she was definitely cured because we wanted to get it back, for purposes of remodifying it.
So now I have a question. There's some pages in the book that have some updated illustrations and photos. Is this Buffy or is this Brian featured?
That is Buffy.
That's Buffy. Oh, good.
That is actual Buffy in the flesh. Yeah.
Wonderful. She made an appearance in the book as well. Yeah.
She did
in the new version. I think that, I was looking at posting something on social media yesterday and was like, again, my dog came to me with some pretty severe resource guarding. And I was like, could I get a picture of him, just doing a little lip lick? I'm like, I don't want to do that for social media. I'll find some stock footage instead.
But kind of that idea
you don't want to get... We've trained it so well where he's like, whatever,
Right.
And so
there's people who will rip you to shreds,
stock footage is safer for sure. Sarah Colonize says, Jean, the book has always been fabulous. The new version is a must repurchase for everyone. I love it. Sarah actually
I'm a fan of yours too. That's great. Thank you so much for saying so.
Sarah had the opportunity to read an advanced version, and her blurb, what she wrote about the book, is what we put on the back of the book. This is an advanced copy that I was editing before it went out to print. But was very happy to have Sarah take a look at this book. And she actually called me and she was like, "This is amazing." She's like, "Have you read it yet?" And so it was so great to get her endorsement. And she also does some really wonderful work.
I just hope it's gonna help more dogs get the help.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. We've got a really interesting question here. And I actually just saw this question or a variation of it on TikTok yesterday. When a dog releases a toy for a treat, tossed away from the toy so that the handler can get the toy and then return the toy back so that the dog knows the toy isn't going away, is that proper training?
Yeah, and it sounds like a good order of events where you're prompting the dog off the toy. The dog goes off the toy, dog gets paid, it sounds like, and so he gets a bonus treat and then he gets the toy back. Yeah, bang on.
I think that the post that I saw on TikTok yesterday was a trainer discussing how sometimes people will like trick the dog and be like, "Oh, look, there's food over here," and then take the toy away.
And if they don't get anything pay off of that, they're going to learn that they're going to call your bluff very soon. Don't lie to dogs. It generally doesn't work very well. There used to be this thing where we'd say, okay, the dog needs eardrops or something. And I had a friend who had a Labrador and the dog needed eardrops. And the dog hated it. And then after a few administrations, the dog was starting to fear him approaching her. And so he started to say, "Oh, it's okay. We're going to go for a car ride. We're going to go for a ride." And then the dog let him approach and then she gave the eardrops. And then the dog became more and more suspicious because he was lying to her. And then we had to sort of undo all that. And the way to do that, first of all, you can, in between, if the dog isn't like in grave danger, with the eardrops, you can desensitize them to enjoy having drops put in. But in the meantime, if you have to kind of put a Band-Aid on it, the way to do it is to not lie, to say, I used to tell him, say torture time before, if it's going to be eardrops, say torture time before you approach, then go, and do the eardrops so that you're protecting normal approach, you're protecting car ride, you're protecting yourself. So that, just basically that bottom line being, don't lie to dogs because you end up in worse soup than you were in beforehand.
I really like that, giving the cue of like torture time, but putting it on cue and not lying to dogs, not tricking them. Absolutely.
Yeah, because you don't want to poison stuff like your approach. You don't want to poison stuff like your hands,
Yeah, we've got a question, and we also we talked about this beforehand. That if the delivery person comes during our interview, our dogs are going to let us know. So just so you all know, full transparency, we have real dogs here in the background. Us professional trainers whose dogs still bark it. It's the Chewy delivery person coming to bring him food. So,
ironically,
real stuff. Sarah says she's got a question about a dog. You've worked with the entire resource guarding protocol. But still ingest item if anyone even says the dog's name. It's a golden retriever, no big surprise. Any suggestions on that?
Yeah, it sounds like the dog, sometimes dogs ingest just because they've got pica and they ingest whatever it is. Sometimes they learn to ingest because they've had a history of the person coming and coercing the item away from them. And they've learned that the way to avoid that is to ingest. And so sometimes that means, okay, you're going to have to go more slowly. They say they've done the entire guarding protocol. I would then say, let's go back and have a look, make sure that the first thing to check is, okay, what we call a CED check in the academy: compliance, execution, then diagnosis. So compliance is first of all, so are they doing it? Then the next thing is, execution. Are they doing it properly? Is there a critical technical error being committed? Because that can sometimes sort of, make the wagon go off the road. If none of that, so if they're doing the homework and they're doing it properly, then the next thing would be, okay, so now let's, branch out and look at what might have to be done here. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of individual case here. I would be inclined to get video of them doing it, so we can have a look at what they're doing to see what they're doing. Or, sometimes when that's happening and you've got the dog with that history, they're going through the protocol, but they're trying to go too fast. So they're what we call pushing without a CER, or pushing a little too prematurely. And you're putting the dog back in the situation where he feels threatened, rather than that this is fantastic. Because the whole idea in research, you try to undo this underlying paranoia, this old buggy software is, if I lose this tennis ball or this sock or this green or whatever it is, we're all going to die, right? It's a big deal. And undoing that, you want to make sure that at no point the dog feels the threat. And so that means going slow enough. The other thing, of course, you got to rule out is pica. In other words, is this dog just a compulsive ingester? And if so, it's a whole other kettle of fish. And so the problem is less resource guarding. The problem is the primary pica.
Yeah. And also, of course, we never want to rule out medical before we start addressing behavior.
Yeah. Pica is always first and foremost a good thorough veterinary rule out before we go behavioral.
You mentioned a CER. For people who are tuning in and might not know what that is, I can tell you it's very well defined in the book and really, really well explained. But could you kind of give a preview for people who are tuning in and kind of a little definition of a CER?
Yeah. So everybody, if you think back in the mists of time to when you were in intro psych class and you did Pavlovian conditioning, and they talked about, there's a sound of a metronome, and then food powder is given to the dog, and eventually gastric secretions happen in response to the metronome. That's called a conditioned response. So we've got the conditioned stimulus, the metronome, the unconditioned stimulus, the food powder, and then you get a conditioned response, which is a learned response where the dog is anticipating, here comes the food, so I'm going to prepare in advance by salivating and emitting gastric secretions. That's a conditioned response. Very interesting, but very much a side note. For us in dog training, we don't care about, stomach juices. We do care about emotions. So there's a subset of conditioned response, which is a conditioned emotional response. Okay. And that's what a CER is. So dogs have conditioned emotional responses, whether we're training them or not. If you bring the leash off the wall, the dog starts doing, yay, we're going for a walk. They have what we call the yippee response, which is the happy CER. You go to the treat cupboard, yay, here comes snacky snacks. If you turn the corner towards, let's say the dog's had a bad experience at the vet and they're going to the vet, they go, oh no, they've learned the route to the vet. They've learned stuff that predicts good stuff and bad stuff. And they either have like an untoward, like one that we don't want. The dog is fearful or anxious or aggressive because they're anticipating something not good, or they're having what we call the yippee response, or the happy, the plus CER, which is the one that we're going for. And so when we're doing protocols and we're trying to get the dog going through a plan, we don't want to go to the next step in the plan until you have a nice, robust CER. So rather than saying, well, he's not guarding, I'm going to go to the next step in the plan, you want more than that. You want the dog to actually be saying, God, I love it when, he approaches me to within 2 feet of my bone or my, dirty sock or whatever. And then you go to the next point in the plan. You don't want to push on just, thin ice, because you're going to end up going through.
I also love that you recommended getting video. I think that, describing a behavior can be one thing, but even thinking about how Sarah's describing this dog, like I'm picturing from my own learning history is a dog that like suddenly eats really fast, like kind of a frantic thing.
Yes. Canaries in the gold mine. Yeah. So when clients will routinely tell me, I do these lots and lots of chows, and they can be a little, sometimes can be tough to read. They don't emit always a lot of growling, snarling, and snapping and stuff. Sometimes it's still waters running deep, and the client will say, well, he's fine, and so they push to the next step in the plan, and and they're merrily going along, but in fact the dog is freezing, or he's not okay, or he's just neutral, in which case it's not appropriate to push to the next step in the plan. And so when clients are doing DIY, the inclination of most people, remember we were talking before about bio speed and how people want stuff fast. Sometimes clients who are not dog trainers, they don't relish the task of training. They don't like the process of training the way we trainers do. We'll train all day long, and if the dog gets trained, we'll go get another dog so we can train that one. Most people who are not self-selected dog trainers, they find dog training to be a chore. It's something they don't want to do. For them, it's like reading user agreements. I mean, it's just, can I get it in pill form? Do I have to do this? Sometimes they catch the bug and they find it fun, or if you make it fun in class, sometimes they'll do it. But generally speaking, they don't find training as inherently reinforcing as we do. So because it's not an intrinsic reinforcer, the reinforcement has to come from outside, and we have to sort of do a couple of things. We have to slow them down, and then we have to supply the reinforcement and tell them that it's going really well. And the only way to do that, to be sure that they're going slow enough, to be sure they're not committing, critical technical errors to do with orders of events or, tip-offs and that kind of stuff, is to see them on video. Now, luckily in this day and age, even though a lot of trainers now work remotely, and we have sort of COVID to thank for the boom in technology of trainers working remotely, that get them to, get some footage of them doing it. Don't take their word for it that they're doing it right. Get footage.
Yes. Jess says context matters so much. Love getting it all on video. I love videoing my own sessions with my dog to be like, oh, I look what I accidentally trained on accident there. Right? I do want to say, since you were talking about the conditioned emotional response and also the classical conditioning, just wanted to say really quick to Sarah's comment that the dog is fantastically. Dog is doing fantastically. Yeah. We'll still ingest if anyone says his name. So I'm wondering if maybe that's you.
Yeah. Okay. So my best guess is early on, when they were doing the wrestling matches with the dog and taking stuff away from the dog coercively, probably it was preceded by the dog's name. So probably, as a Brian, what are you doing? Brian, what have you got? You know what I mean? And then, so they learn that 8 times out of 10 or whatever, that when they hear their name, it means here comes the, forced removal. So that's my best guess. Don't know, but that could be
really good. Happening. Really good idea.
Yeah. Going back to counter condition that.
Even what we were talking about earlier, like we got to set our expectations if we're going to do torture patterns or something that they don't want. But also it's how often, right? Is our dog barking at the window and you're like, oh my gosh, stop. We know it's the mailman. And, I have to stop for a minute, slow down, take that pause and say, thank you so much for letting me know. Come over here. Let's do this thing instead. But that's not what we go to first, right? What do you have in your mouth?
And remember, it's always so useful to remember that we bred it in. We bred watchdog barking into dogs,
Absolutely.
So they didn't ask for that.
Yeah, Jess says time for a nickname to be the new call name. And I think you're right about, counter conditioning that name or finding something else. We've got a couple more questions.
That's a very good solution to rename the dog.
We have a couple questions I want to get to before we run out of time. Cricket wants to know if there are any meds that you have seen prescribed that you have a good experience with in decreasing the time of treatment or how long it takes to resolve an intervention.
That's a great question. With other kinds of aggression, stranger danger, separation anxiety, sometimes body handling, I think I'm a medication fan. I mean, I love sending dogs for a good meds consult, especially if it's sort of severe or if it's refractory. In resource guarding, tends to do fine without meds. So generally speaking, I don't send dogs unless there's a comorbidity, so something else going on that would benefit from the meds. I tend not to send them for a meds consult. Does that mean that it wouldn't help? It's possible it would. And probably something with the, in the kind of anti-compulsive, impulse control, impulse control kind of framework, the SSRIs and that type. But I'm over my head. I tend not to, and I've not done enough cases where I have medicated to be able to say.
Really great question. Ben, I'm going to save your question. We've got one from Jane saying, I've experienced dogs that have negative CERs that have prior associations in coercive-based training, as I've seen them eat grass when we start training. Is this indicative of physiological stress?
That's a great question. I don't know. I certainly, there's a thought out there that when dogs eat grass, they're trying to regulate or trying to get themselves to regurgitate or fix their stomachs. Yeah. And so in other words, could that be an indication that now we're starting to do this training, the dog's hearkening back to when it was nasty, and then therefore they've got their tummy they were starting to eat grass. It's possible, but it's a new one for me. Yeah. Interesting question.
I know we've only got a couple minutes, so if you've got one last question for Jean, go ahead and put it in the comments. I want to
Any
share with
chow
you.
people out there?
I brought this up earlier because I wanted to let people know that I posted something similar to this. This was the stock footage that I took instead of getting my own dog to growl at the food bowl at me last night. So we used a stock image of a dog eating out of a food bowl, but the five very common myths about resource guarding in dogs. And luckily, we don't have time to go through them right now because now I can tell you all to go buy the book and read it and see what it's about. I was hoping we could pick one and talk about it, but I really love all of these myths and how you dispel them in the book. So consider this, everyone who's tuning in, your encouragement to go and check out the book. And it looks like we've got time for just maybe a couple more questions. Let's see what we've got. Why would a dog resource guard with the owner but not the trainer when we're doing the exact same thing when we're training? Great question.
Two possible reasons. One is the trainer's technique is as it should be, and the owner's got a technical flaw that we've got to uncover and fix. The other thing is that the owner is got the baggage. Okay, so we get to go in as a fresh stimulus. We get what we call sort of novel stimulus sort of advantage. And so sometimes it goes faster with us. And so that's not at all unusual. It just means that the owner just make sure, get someone to check to see how they're doing it, and then just buy some patience and make sure that they may have to go a little bit slower and put in more splits.
Fantastic. You do talk in this version about splits. And again, when you're talking about training plateaus and the way you really explain how to do a split, or there's even a whole section where you talk about creative splits. I had all these pictures, like pages of the book I wanted to share, but we had such great questions today.
Great question.
Y'all are going to have to just go by and read the book. But you talk I really like your discussion of splits and like finding creative splits.
Yeah.
It's not always clear right away, like, oh, well, here, we did this step and this step. So just whatever's in the middle kind of.
Sometimes there's more efficient ways to get from A to B. If you're stuck between 2 and 3, there's sometimes, specific ones that are a good way to go.
Yeah. I want to let everyone know that there are several books at Dogwise right now that are on sale, including some of Jean's other books like Fight and Oh Behave and Dogs Are From Neptune, all of which actually are also available as audiobooks. But please head over to Dogwise to be able to take advantage of those books that are currently on sale. And we've got one more question that I wanted to save for the end, because those of you who watched to the end, I wanted to let you all know that we also are going to be giving you a unique coupon code. So if you go to dogwise.com and buy your copy of Jean's second edition of mine today, you can save 20% with the coupon code FBLive20. So anyone who watched to the end and wants to use that coupon code also works for other books we've done author interviews on. So go back and watch our other author interviews on Facebook and YouTube. But Ben has a great question that I'm excited to close with. Ben says, I have the first edition of this book. I've ordered the second edition. How much difference should I expect in the second edition? So is it worth it? I can tell you, and Sarah can tell you yes, but I will let Jean answer.
Yeah, I wouldn't have done it if it was just small tweaks. So in terms of the overall philosophy, it's that there's good cohesion. It's not that different. In terms of the nuts and bolts, the how to do this, then this, then this, and this, it's quite a bit different. And so if you're somebody who's doing the practical end of it, then yeah, it is quite a bit different.
I will go ahead and share because I did pull these pages together earlier to be able to share with folks. This is some pictures from the first edition of the book. So you'll kind of see what the first edition looked like. I actually really loved these like super duper breakdown steps. Plans. But look at this, there's 60 steps and then level 2 is.
Oh yeah, the preemptively splitty plans had to do with the thought at the time, which was, oh my God, I'm sending people off to DIY this. How can I slow them down? If they're not under trainer supervision, I've got to slow them down. And so it was like, okay, let's put every conceivable ridiculous split in there. And so yeah.
I really like that level 2 is repeat steps 1 through 60, but with increase, like make it a little bit harder.
Yeah.
And just to
kind of, you don't need to do most of the time. You don't need to do that.
Yeah, just to give you guys some reference, this is page 34 of the book, and look at how much simpler these steps are. And to your point, Jean, of like, if you were sending people home to DIY, you wanted to make sure that they weren't skipping any steps. And it's such a great resource. It's such a great manual, a good guide for getting started. But I think there's so much in the second version.
People should do this stuff under supervision of a qualified trainer.
Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and put our coupon code up for people who are still tuned in and still watching. But Jean, before we sign off, what I do want to share with you is we have so many people who have jumped in to say thank you, who's glad for all of the information that we have shared today. So thank you everyone for joining in. Wonderful messages. Thank you, Dogwise, for hosting and making science-based information easily accessible. That is absolutely our mission here at Dogwise. So thank you all for tuning in and for asking your questions. We absolutely love having you all join us. And Sarah just wants to close with, it's 100% worth it, Ben. Go buy it. And everyone else who's watching, go ahead and use this coupon code. Jean, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Erica. It's been fine.